Hello everyone, peace be with you. I hope you're doing well. It's me, Sammy. I'm back with another discussion. The reason I had a little absence was because of the change in time and the change of season slash the days getting becoming shorter. Usually when I make these videos, I make them towards sundown. So in any case, that's the reason. Sorry for taking long. But I'm back, and I will be back always, God willing. So last we spoke, we talked about the ELF and its growth, the growth of the ELF. We mentioned the Kabassans, what they were going through. We mentioned the allies of Haile Selassie. So the ELF was growing. They modeled their organization after the Algerian struggle. So what they did was they divided the army into zones. Zones 1 through 4 initially. So each zone more or less corresponded with a region. Zone 1 corresponded with Barka. Zone 2, Karan Sahel. Zone 3, Kabassa. Zone 4, Dankalia and Samhar, if I'm not mistaken. So we talked about that. We talked about how the leaders of the Supreme Council, which was made up of 3 people, Idris Muhammad Adam, Usman Idris Galaidos is his name, Galaidos, and Usman Saleh Sabbeh. So these people they had direct contact with their respect with the zones that reflected their ethnic backgrounds, you could say. So the Bani Amir, or Zone 1, they had a special relationship with Idris Muhammad Adam. The Karan Sahel area, a special relationship with Usman Galaidos, and the coastal region had a good relationship with Usman Sabbeh. Zone 3 did not get to enjoy that. What power did those people have? The Supreme Council? They had access to the resources, supplies, arms, scholarships, etc. They had the access because they had the power. So, but unfortunately, the Kabassa were not. They didn't have that luxury. They didn't have that luxury, and their 2 leaders were Muslim. The Kabassa Christian became kind of, in a way, marginalized. So what happened as a result was the ELF created the Zone 5. Which consisted initially of Karan Sahel folks, but what they wanted to do, their aim was to mobilize the Kabassans because they were said to be an important factor or a decisive factor in the revolution. We discussed the allies of Ethiopia when we discussed them towards the end as well as the end, I believe it was. So the end we did, and then towards the end, maybe the middle, we discussed the Ethiopian allies. America and Israel were big allies of Ethiopia. Despite that, Haile Selassie was still scared of Arab influence in the region because the Arabs were opposed by Israel and America. But Haile Selassie, despite having backings from America and Israel, he still wasn't satisfied. He didn't feel comfortable. So I don't know. So that's how it went. That's how it went. That's who he was. And so it's quite interesting that, America and Israel would back up the Ethiopia. Let's continue. So we're on chapter 5, Eritrean refugees before 1975. Before anything, I begin in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. I praise and I glorify him as he ought to be praised and glorified. So this section I'll make relatively short. Let's see how much we We'll probably make it about maybe 20 minutes. So Eritrean refugees before 1975, displacement of groups of peoples and, in very rare cases, individuals. So displacement of groups of peoples and, in very rare cases, individuals were frequent phenomena in the region of Northeast Africa where Eritrea is located. Yet no one called them refugees. Not even their after colonial boundaries were demarcated. So after colonial boundaries were demarcated and this place was known as Eritrea, still no one was calling them refugees. There's a footnote after it says were frequent phenomena in the region. So the Arabs think the name Al-Habasha, Abyssinia, is derived from an Arabic word for mixture, describing the constant mixing up of peoples in the region. So this is what the Arabs think, that Al-Habasha, that's the word in Arabic, Al-Habasha, Abyssinia in English, which I think comes from Portuguese and becomes anglicized. Or in English they call it Abyssinia, but I think it has a Portuguese root in any case, or origin. So Al-Habasha is derived from an Arabic word for mixture, describing the constant mixing up of peoples in the region. Al-Habasha, where that name came from initially, as in where it came from day one, I don't know. But the Habasha are known as Habasha because there was a tribe called Habashat, which came from South Arabia, specifically Yemen, I believe. South Arabia was not limited to Yemen. Parts of the bottom part of so-called Saudi Arabia, as well as I believe part of Oman. The western part of Oman was part of South Arabia. So that's where it came from. So whenever you guys say Habasha, 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 or if you're Amara and you say Abasha, 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 it's going back to across the Red Sea. This is just the truth. If you like it, if you don't like it, there are things about history you can like and you don't like, but just because you don't like it doesn't mean that it's not true. The truth is not based on what you find favorable. So the term refugee was applied to Eritreans for the first time in the early 1940s when Ethiopia claimed there were some 100,000 Eritreans in Addis Ababa who were not willing to go to still colonized Eritrea. They were not willing to go to still colonized Eritrea, then under British occupation. They were used in a cover political organization called Ethiopia Hamasiyyan Society. So they were used in a cover political organization called Ethiopia Hamasiyyan Society, whose fighting fund and a weekly newspaper, The Voice of Eritrea, were financed by Haile Selassie's government in the campaign to regain the lost province. Propaganda. You could find that in Travaskis. As you can see, history is repeating itself with Abiy Ahmed doing the same thing again. Doing the same thing again, playing this Asab belongs to us card, that's not true. But, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. We don't like Isaias. And those of you who are going to say, oh, who's we? You're not included. If you like Isaias, we don't want you either. Stay in Sweden. Stay in Norway. Stay wherever you are. Stay wherever you are. We're not interested in you either. We're not interested in you. And, in Eritrea, you will find many people who are displeased with you. So don't, yes, you're Eritrean, perhaps by birth, meaning you were born in Eritrea, an Eritrean national, or you're someone like me who was born in the diaspora, but you have nothing to do with Eritrea, which is ironic because those people who support Isaias, when people like me talk, they say that we're not Eritreans, but the reality is that they're not Eritreans because they're traitors to the land. Because Isaias is a traitor to the land. You follow him, you're also a traitor to the land. You're a traitor to the land. Wave your stupid flag all you want. You're a traitor. You are a traitor. The biggest traitor in the world is you. But the first real Eritrean refugees who crossed international borders owing to well-founded fear of persecution, as the 1951 UN Convention on the Status of Refugees defined in term, were leaders of trade unions and political parties who were escaping arbitrary imprisonment or death. So they were leaders of trade unions and political parties who were escaping arbitrary imprisonment or death. One such early example was Walde Ab Walde Mariam, who, having narrowly escaped 7 Ethiopian assassination attempts on his life in Asmara, fled the country in 1954. He was granted by Egypt the status of political refugee, which he had retained until recently. Recently meaning recently in relation to 1992, when this book was published. This book being Eritrea, Root Causes of War and Refugees by Mr. Walde Jesus Ammar. So, as previously noted, others followed his path. But what were the various causes of flight for Eritrean refugees before the 1974 revolution in Ethiopia? Before the 1974 revolution in Ethiopia. Who were they and where did they go? The revolution, I believe, by the Derg against Haile Selassie. Who were they and where did they go? These are the key questions which will have to be answered in the study of the causes of refugeeism. These are the key questions which will have to be answered in the study of the causes of refugeeism for the first half of the 30-year armed conflict in Eritrea. It must also be noted at the outset that the definition of refugee here is not narrowed down to the 1951 UN Convention and its 1967 protocol. Political persecution can be extended to economic strangulation of a targeted victim community or groups of communities. Again, political persecution can be extended to economic strangulation of a targeted victim community or groups of communities. Similarly, the new situation of protracted warfare in the third world requires a flexible definition like the Organization of African Unity's Refugee Convention of 1969. Again, similarly, the new situation of protracted warfare in the third world requires a flexible definition like the Organization of African Unity's Refugee Convention, the Organization of African Unity's Refugee Convention of 1969, which takes into consideration generalized conditions of violence as strong push factors. And we're going to go into what Elizabeth Ferris says. So again, just because it was quite a long sentence. Similarly, the new situation of protracted warfare, the new situation of protracted warfare in the third world, developing countries or less developed countries, requires a flexible definition like the Organization of African Unity's Refugee Convention of 1969, which takes into consideration generalized conditions of violence as strong push factors. As Elizabeth Ferris states, changes in the nature of warfare over the past 30 years have affected the nature of refugee movements. A shift toward guerrilla warfare and involvement of peasant populations has produced a much higher proportion of civilian casualties than earlier wars fought almost exclusively between professional soldiers. So she's saying, again, a shift toward guerrilla warfare and involvement of peasant populations has produced a much higher proportion of civilian casualties than earlier wars fought amongst almost exclusively between professional soldiers. So now we have guerrilla warfare. People are fighting. Streets are becoming battlefields. Streets are becoming battlefields. Your neighborhood is a battlefield. It's not with people that are guerrillas, that are militias, that are like militias made up of regular people, and they're out on the streets or out in various places fighting. Civilians are affected by this compared to the past, where wars were mainly between one army against another. If you want to compare it to the American Revolution, you had guerrillas going against a conventional army. The Redcoats, the British Redcoats, were trained. They were an army. They were an army. The colonists who were in America, they were part of militias. They would hide behind trees and fight that way. They were not fighting generally in conventional warfare where, there's one group of people on this side and another group of people on this side. No, it was more like attack, run away, attack, run away. They learned this, according to what we learned in history anyway, they learned this from the Native Americans. So that's a tactic. So this is what was going on in Eritrea. And Elizabeth Ferris, I don't know who she is, but she wrote a book. I think it's a book given its italicized title, Refugees and World Politics. New York, Prager, I guess that's who the publisher is, Prager, 1985, page 17. So it led to high civilian casualties. Civilians are getting caught in the crossfire. This shift toward guerrilla warfare. The changes in the nature of warfare over the past 30 years have affected the nature of refugee movements. So you see, wars became... now, I don't know much about how wars were before this time, but from what I'm gathering, wars were almost exclusively between armies. For example, the German army against the Russian army. So it's like this army versus that army. Two armies, two people that have, guns or swords or cannons, these mortars, these types of things, aircraft, naval ships, these kinds of things. Both of them have them. Both of them are armies. Civilians weren't always there. Now you can see that this is the case in war-torn countries, Ethiopia, places in the Middle East, and other places. So, in any case, the relevance of this description to the third world refugee phenomena since the early 1960s will be manifestly demonstrated alongside the growth of the Eritrean Liberation Movement, not the ELM. The Eritrean Liberation Movement meaning just the general movement for independence, the general revolution. The escalation of the armed conflict and the consequent displacement of peoples. Again, the relevance of this description to the third world refugee phenomena. The relevance of this description to the third world refugee phenomena since the early 1960s will be manifestly demonstrated alongside the growth of the Eritrean Liberation Movement. The escalation of the Eritrean Liberation Movement, the escalation of the armed conflict, and the consequent displacement of peoples. So this relevance is going to be shown alongside the growth of the revolution or the revolutionary movement. We're going to see. And that's what the book is titled, Root Causes of War and Refugees. Next we're going to talk about causes of flight. Why people left. What was the purpose? What was the reason that people started leaving Eritrea? Why did they do that? Unfortunately, people are leaving Eritrea right now. As I speak, someone is planning or is in the act of escaping the country as we speak. Perhaps he's making it, succeeding. Maybe he's failing. We don't know. I shouldn't say failing. I don't want to use that word. Maybe he's succeeding. Maybe he is facing, or maybe he got shot and killed, God forbid, maybe imprisoned, God forbid. This is in Eritrea. Who are they running from and why are they running currently? Is there any war in Eritrea? No. There hasn't been one since 1998. So even that wasn't a war in Eritrea. I mean, that was a war with Ethiopia on the border. So the last war was the revolution, which was over 30 years ago. So why are people running away? Ask Higdef. Ask the supporters of the PFDJ, the People's Front of Democracy and Justice. Ask them. Apparently, perhaps it's those people escaping Eritrea are Tigrayan. Apparently, they're Agame. Apparently, they're not Eritreans. Those people escaping, they're not Eritreans. They're in Eritrea, but they're not Eritreans. They're Tigrayans somehow. Stupidity upon stupidity. In any case, Eritreans are running from a crazy dictator. In any case, I will see you guys, God willing. I will see you guys tomorrow, because today was a shorter program. But I will see you guys tomorrow, God willing. Tomorrow meaning Friday. I will see you guys tomorrow, Friday. And we'll talk about the causes of flight, the causes of refugeeism during the Eritrean armed struggle. I'll see you then. Until next time, keep safe, be well, peace be with you. I'll see you next time, God willing.